This is the Talkin Bout The Hoosiers podcast, presented by thehoosier.com. Hey, before we jump into this episode of the Talkin Bout The Hoosiers podcast, make sure you are subscribed to the Hoosier on 3 on YouTube for all the IU content you could need, including press conferences, highlights, recruiting updates, the Hoosier tailgate, and of course, the Talkin Bout The Hoosiers podcast. Also, go follow Talkin Bout The Hoosiers on Spotify. We really appreciate it and hope you enjoy this episode of the Talkin Bout The Hoosiers podcast.
Hey, what's going on, Hoosier Nation? Hey, real quickly before we get started here with this video, make sure you go over to thehoosier.com and join for just $1 in your first week. With that, you get a free year subscription to theathletic.com, where you can also check out all of their content as well. Come over to thehoosier.com, join the best IU community there is out there. We'd love to have you.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Talkin Bout The Hoosiers podcast presented by Academy Sports and Outdoors. I'm joined by Zach Browning and Kyler Staley, and we got a breaking news episode. It's breaking news season. Indiana has landed a commitment from top 50 wing Vaughn Karvala. You know, Indiana needed a commitment. It kind of struck out a little bit recently on some other guys like Anthony Thompson, and Darren DeVries gets back on the board. Kyler, I'm just going to throw it to you. What are your initial thoughts on Karvala's commitment?
We need like alarms or something to add to these breaking news pods and everything to really wake some people up. But no, it's today Indiana gets its second commitment of the 2026 class. Another hybrid wing type of player in Vaughn Karvala, a guy that's, really seen his stock kind of rise over the past few years. Like you mentioned, Drew, he's a top 50 prospect. Just when you look at him, long-term potential is really what you look with him. He's a guy that's extremely athletic. He's long, lanky. More of a wing guy right now, really makes a lot of plays off straight line drives, has a really quick, explosive first step, has shown a lot of progression, with his outside shot. So to me, he's a versatile player that just makes sense to be in DeVries' style. So, and I think he picked Indiana over, was it California and Xavier?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, and this is obviously coming off, he had his official visit to Indiana a few weeks ago. So, Indiana really made Carvala a priority once, Anthony Thompson was out of the picture. A guy that, not at, he's still a top 50 guy and everything, but like nationally, he's not that household name, in the 2026 class, but you pair him with Prince Alexander Moody. Those are just two guys that I think long-term, they're going to be really, really good college basketball players. And Indiana, really needed to get another guy, like you said, Drew. And they got a really good prospect for Carvala.
Yeah, Zach, what are your thoughts on Karvala's commitment?
Yeah, I think obviously he's a good player. Obviously, Kyler talked about what he kind of brings on the court and stuff like that. He's a top 50 kid, number 43, I believe, according to the Rivals industry ranking. But I think it also is a little bit of a statement, Darren DeVries joining this recruitment later than Cal and Xavier, who they ended up beating. So I think it's a positive statement that Indiana can join recruitment late. They can kind of flex some NIL muscle against programs like Xavier and programs like Cal when they need to. And this is a situation where Indiana had lost out on some guys. Ethan Taylor as well, another one that everything points to him going to Michigan State at this point. So Indiana's been losing out on the recruiting trail in 2026 over the last couple of weeks. Latrell Almond, of course, as well. So this is one that Indiana kind of needed. Indiana needed a win. And this is just let me go out and find a kid and get a notch under my belt if you're Darren DeVries. This is the highest rated recruit Darren DeVries has ever landed as a college head coach. And I think that's what's pretty telling. And I think this is the type of guy where you look at his ranking, you look at his skill set. He's a perfect guy for Darren DeVries because he's got some Trent Sisley in him to the point where he's talented enough to make an impact right away, but he's not super talented. He's not a one-and-done guy, probably not even a two-and-done guy. He's going to be in the program, you would think, for a while, obviously barring the transfer portal and whatnot. But you need guys like that. If you're really realistically trying to rebuild a program, which is what Darren DeVries is doing, this isn't 4 or 5 or 6 years down the line at this point, you need a guy like Carvala. Sisley falls in this category as well, where he's really talented. He can impact your team and your program right away as a freshman with his shooting, with his athleticism, with his ability to just make shots on the offensive end of the floor. But he's also going to be around for a couple of years after his freshman year. He's not just a one-and-done guy like an Anthony Thompson would be. He's not a borderline one-and-done guy, maybe two-and-done guy like a Latrell Almond would have been. So I think this is important not only just for the fact that Indiana gets another notch. It's a really good nonsense, a really good player and a player that I would expect to be around for at least a handful of years.
Yeah, it's a good point you make. Obviously, Indiana has been involved in some of these guys that are projected to be one and dones, maybe two and done type players. And Carvala, even going to Moody too, those guys don't project to be that. And it's the mix of DeVries isn't just going for, the one and dones or just for the guys who are going to develop. He's trying to find a mix of both as he looks to build the program, because the current roster as it stands, it's all transfers with a couple freshmen in there. And I want to say there's 5 open spots now for next year with Carvala. So there is room to add freshmen and potential transfers as well. Like DeVries, he's building a program from the ground up. The number always seemed to be 4. It was going to be 4 freshmen Indiana was going to bring in. That's kind of been the target, that's kind of quietly been spoken. And now you have 2. So I'm kind of curious to see what other, who are the next 2 Indiana looks to get alongside Carvala and Moody.
Yeah, and I don't know if they'll necessarily get more freshmen. I know a lot of people, a lot of Indian fans, we look at our boards and everything. They don't like the idea of having to always get a huge transfer portal class, right? We saw that a lot with Mike Woodson. That was kind of his MO. Obviously he wants to get the best transfers out there and stuff. But I always thought, when you looked at like the 2027 class, that was really going to be the year that Coach DeVries really kind of gets his guys and everything, guys that, he spent time recruiting, for a year plus as well. So I always thought, going into the 2026, 2027 season, it was going to be another year where, we need to go out and get some really solid transfer portal guys, but also have guys that have been in the program, for a year. And then getting these freshmen like Prince Alexander Moody and Vaughn Karvala, guys that, you can develop and, have for a while. Because that's kind of what Coach DeVries wants to do, right? He mentioned, I think, in his opening press conference when he was announced as the head coach, he wants to build core. He wants to build a culture and everything. And he wants to have guys like Carvala, like Prince Alexander Moody, and then we'll even go with like Chase Branham, in the 2027 class. And wants to have guys that will be there for a while that he can develop, that'll have a good understanding with his system, and then just fill in the gaps with really good transfer portal guys. So, right now, obviously there's a little bit of frustration too that, they missed out on guys like Ethan Taylor and Anthony Thompson, missed out on those like high profile guys. But, that's probably the next step in high school recruiting is for Coach DeVries to land one of those types of guys, because landing guys like Prince Alexander Moody, Vaughn Karvala, those guys are great long-term pieces and stuff. But at the same time, obviously if you want to be in a win now mode and stuff, you're going to have to figure out a way to land some 5 stars, land a couple of guys. But you also got to be smart about the 5 stars. With Woodson, it was kind of, we're going to try to throw as many offers of 5 stars to see which one sticks or whatnot, but they might not have been a good fit, where I think DeVries is going to be a lot more calculated, and he's going to be a lot more, he's going to be a lot more specific of the guys that he recruits, that's going to be in his system, and that hopefully, fits his system well at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think it's important. It's finding a balance. Obviously you can't only bring in freshmen each year. You also can't, reload each year with the transfer portal. You got to find the balance of what works for you. I think Indiana ideally wants to be at a point where most of their players are freshmen, like coming in as freshmen, and then you're filling in the gaps with, maybe someone leaves earlier than expected, or maybe someone doesn't work out and you need a point guard, and just filling in the gaps in the transfer portal rather than, rebuilding an entire roster, even though, we've seen DeVries is capable of that. He's done it 2 years in a row, but he just does not want to do that. That's not what Indiana wants to be doing moving forward. So finding the Vaughn Karvalas and getting them committed, it's going to help build the program. So then, 2 years from now, Indiana's not, desperate and overpaying a transfer because they don't have anyone at that position.
And I think it's important also, Carvala just fits, and Kyler touched on it a little bit. He just fits. You look at Carvala, you look at Moody, you look at in the 2027 class, Chase Branham, there's positional size, there's length, there's versatility. Carvala could probably play anywhere 2 through 4 at the college level, even as just a freshman, depending on how much size and weight he can put on playing those bigger forward spots. But he just fits. He can shoot the ball. Check. He's athletic. He can get up and down the floor. Check. He's versatile, can play multiple positions. Check. So I think it's just about checking boxes for Darren DeVries. And you look at every single committee he's gotten so far out of the high school ranks at Indiana. You look at Moody, Carvala, you look at Branham. They check the boxes, and that's exactly Kyler touched on it. He's not looking to build a pool of talent and then forcing the talent to play his way and forcing the talent to play together. He's looking to find guys that fit together that also happen to be talented. And I think that's kind of the case you've got with Carvala. Because if you're looking at the guys that are expected to be on the roster next year for Indiana, you look at that forward group, and that's going to be a talented group of forwards. Trent Sisley, you expect to be back. Desai Miles, Nick Dorn, those guys will have eligibility. You throw in Carvala in there, and that's a really solid young group of forwards that maybe not so much Carvala in year one, but DeVries trusts those guys to kind of round out a forward rotation at that 2, 3, and maybe 4 spot in his lineup next year, even just looking beyond this upcoming season. So I think it's important that it's not just a talented player, it's a talented player that fits what Darren DeVries wants to do.
I'll throw in one more thing, and then I guess we kind of wrap it up a little bit. But, Carvala, when you look at just pure athleticism, I mean, I highly recommend, one, you guys go over to thehoosier.com, read the scouting report and everything else we got on there. But go check out his highlights as well. This dude is a freak athlete. He's not the biggest guy, so obviously he's going to need to add weight. He's going to need to find a good balance, with strength and obviously keeping that athleticism, that balance and everything. But, man, he's really tough matchup, man. And like I mentioned, his shooting has gotten a lot better. Had a really, really good AAU season that finally got, a lot of good schools looking at him and, wanting to take a chance on him. Obviously, Indiana got in a little late with him, but they were able to close it down and get him, to commit to the program. So defensively, I think he has potential to be a really good rim protector as well. So there's a lot to like about him. I would expect probably sophomore year is probably what you're going to see out of him. I think probably Prince Alexander Moody's probably just slightly ahead, when it comes to development, a guy that could possibly play right away over Vaughn Karvala. But I think he's going to be really good for this Indiana team long-term, sophomore, junior year. I think he's going to be one of the better wings possibly that could be in the Big Ten Conference.
Yeah, and I think it's also important, looking at the class as a whole. I think a lot of, Indiana fans, the talk all season, especially when you look at the roster this year, is, need a center, where's the center? Darren DeVries isn't going to force it. He's out there trying, he is trying to recruit a center. It's pretty clear. I mean, Indiana's had a ton of top centers on campus trying to, get that position filled. And even if Indiana's, doesn't fill that spot, you still have, an Andre Akmovich next year as well as another guy who could step into that center role, and the transfer portal will be there. Obviously you want to fill that roster with freshmen. You want to have the positions filled where you have guys you can build up moving forward. But Darren DeVries also has proven he can be someone who can go get a top player in the transfer portal and bring in, a top center if Indiana needs that for the roster next year. And like you said, Kyler, I agree. I think Moody is, more college ready right now. But again, Carvala just transferred to a bigger school. So maybe, we see what we saw with Trent Sisley, where, Trent Sisley, when he committed, if I told you he was going to be a big player freshman year, you probably would have looked at me like, okay. But then the growth from, him going to Montverde, you've seen it. So if Carvala can have that type of growth too, he could be a big impact as a freshman too. With that being said, though, for all the future, Indiana recruitments, offers, commitments, all that stuff, the Hoosiers got you covered. So if you haven't done so already, follow the Hoosier on Twitter and subscribe to the Hoosier for premium content, exclusive interviews, scouting reports, and access to the Hoosier Hangout message board. And subscribe to the YouTube channel. We really appreciate it. Hit that like button. Follow Talking About the Hoosiers on Spotify so you guys are up to date on all of the stuff we're doing. Thank you guys for tuning in to another breaking news episode of the Talking About the Hoosiers podcast. We'll be back.